Good evening. Welcome to my next live stream for developing Node-RED internals. Thank you for joining. If this is the first time you're watching this, whether on the live stream on Twitch or the watching on catch up on YouTube, these streams are just me spending an hour or so working on the core of Node-RED itself, working on code issues either in the runtime or in the editor. Hopefully revealing some of the tips and tricks for how I develop Node-RED. Excuse me, I'll just turn my phone off so I don't buzz away in the background. Just basically working on Node-RED development. So this isn't about how you use Node-RED and how to get the most out of using Node-RED. This is about how you develop Node-RED. And hopefully if this encourages anyone watching to have a go at picking something off the backlog, come and chat to us on Slack or on the forum, and work your way towards actually doing a pull request. That would be awesome. So what's the plan for tonight? What's the plan for the next hour? So for those following the project, we did our 1.10 release last week, and thanks to the beta, I think that's gone pretty well. We had a couple. The beta certainly helped flush out some of the buglets with the grouping and the new outline view. But as is inevitable, the beta testing can only do so much based on who's prepared to try out the beta. So we've had a few issues come in over the last few days. Nothing super critical. We've not had to rush anything out because something is just really, really badly broken. But certainly a few bits and pieces to tidy up. So we'll do a maintenance release this week, hopefully in the next couple of days. And so tonight I was just going to pluck a couple of the issues off the backlog that have come in over the last week and have a look at fixing them. Already done a few through the course of today, but there's a couple more that I've saved because one certainly delves into an area I've not covered before on these live streams, so I thought it'd be worth, even though I think it's going to be a very trivial fix, it'll be a good excuse just to open up that bit of the code and talk through a bit about what it's doing, how it's doing it, that type of thing. Okay. So do say hi if you're watching the live stream. Say hi in the chat so I know you're there. Otherwise, I'm just going to plow on. If you are watching the live stream, have any questions, do jump in. Otherwise, I press that and you can see. Hi, Daryl. Good to see you back. So here we are. The GitHub issue list, as I say, I think since 1.10 shipped, actually we've had 10 issues come in. Curiously, these bottom two, both related to the debug, the feature where you can open up debug in a new window. These are two issues that were opened up very close together by completely unrelated people that are actually two different views of the same problem. But it's actually a long-standing issue. 1.1 didn't break this. This was already dodgy in 1.0, so I'm not going to worry about here and now. This next issue, getting a blank window in Chrome when you switch back to the Node-RED tab after a while. So there's maybe 2 or 3 people, I think, in this thread. Yeah, 3 people in this thread reporting this behavior in Chrome, although I think Daniel here also managed to reproduce in Firefox. Very strange issue where the editor, you switch tabs in your browser and the workspace is just white, blank. And then it takes resizing the window to get it to redraw. Very strange. Yeah, very odd. So this is one I thought we might... I've no idea what's actually broken, what's causing it, but I do know one of the significant changes we made in 1.1 is we moved in the editor, we moved to using the Requestanimationframe API, which is a standard browser API that basically you tell the browser, I need you to do some drawing work. Please call the function I'm going to give you at a different part of the refresh loop of when it refreshes the frame. It's, I mean, as it says, request animation frame. It's designed for animations that you want to run at like 60 frames a second or whatever it might be, because it runs in a different part of the event loop to event handling, clicking on stuff. So it keeps those things separate. So it keeps things responsive whilst being able to try and maintain a high throughput of animation. That's the only, the fact we use that API rather than just do things synchronously, because request animation frame, it is async. It's a request that later the browser will come back and call that function to do the drawing. So the only thing I can think of is there's something about that that's causing a weirdness. So one of the things we're going to add in 1.1, I'm not quite ready to completely revert it because we've not been deluged by people complaining about this. And at worst, you just have to nudge your window to get it to refresh when you return to the tab. Now, I'm fully prepared to revert it if it proves to be the cause. But what we'll do in 1.1, in the maintenance release, is we'll add a debug flag that users will be able to set to revert the behavior. So anyone seeing this, we'll get them to set that flag, and then if they still see the behavior, we'll know it's not related to request animation frame. What we do if we discover it's not related to request animation frame, I don't know. So that might be one thing we look at quickly tonight, but we'll see. Mauricio, our friend who does the Midnight theme, has managed to track down quite a few more hard-coded CSS styles. I did that in a previous live stream, if that's something you're interested in. I don't think I'm going to step through all of those. Hey, there's Mauricio in the chat. Good to see you. Yeah, very good timing to join. So I don't think I'm going to step through all of these tonight. It's just going to be very mechanical, hunt down where have I hard-coded something and then just move it to the CSS file so it can be styled. Skip over that one. So actually, whilst we talk about themes, this was an issue from Requestanimationframe, who is the author of one of the other custom themes, the Solarized based ones. He's spotted the script we provide to help generate custom themes is redefining the animation keyframes that we use in the CSS, which breaks them. Again, it doesn't cause any, it doesn't break any functionality. It just means some of the fade in and shaking of boxes that we have using keyframes stop working. So that needs tidying up. Need to make the build custom theme script a bit smarter to not wipe out those keyframes. And whilst we're there, Requestanimationframe also, I mean, he's flagged up, he's an Android tablet power user, and he flagged up some good issues during the beta, and he's spotted some problems around wiring up subflow ports, so the special subflow nodes. I've spent a bit of time on that. It's tricky to work on that on the live stream because it involves me doing stuff on the tablet, and I'm not really set up to live stream so you can follow, and it's a bit tedious because it's just a lot of tracking through events to work out why are the events different when done on a touchscreen to a browser. We've also had reports in the forum that a lot of the touch UI is broken on iPads, so Safari or whatever the default browser is based on. Now, that's unfortunate that we didn't pick those up during the beta. Unfortunately, I don't have access to an iPad. If I could go to the office, I would. I'd be able to borrow one from work, but no going into the office anytime soon. So, yeah, need to come up with a plan for that. Then a couple more issues. One came in today. This is an issue we kind of know about. It's in the sense that it's more a limitation of the debug sidebar than an issue as such, and that's if you pass to debug an array type, then we only display in debug the array properties, so the numbered indexed properties. But of course in JavaScript, not in JSON, but in JavaScript, arrays are just objects and they can have arbitrary properties. So I'm just looking through his example here. You can see here's an array. Let me zoom that a bit. Here's an array. It's got element 0 is foo, element 1 is foo, but then it's got properties, index, input, so on and so forth, which is valid JavaScript, not valid JSON. But in the debug sidebar, we don't display these extra properties for efficiency reasons. There's no easy way. If we know it's an array, we can very efficiently encode it. But if it's, because it could be an array of like 10,000 items. But if we've got to walk through all 10,000 every time and decide, is this an array property or one of these extra properties, that would get quite inefficient. So not sure how we're going to address that. And finally, this is the one I'm actually going to spend a bit of time on this live stream. So in 1.1, there was a feature came in from Hitachi, which allows you in admin auth to provide a custom tokens function. So this can be used to authenticate any request to the admin API using a custom token that's not part of the inbuilt tokens that Node-RED would normally generate. Now, this feature was conceived for scripted access to the admin API, because if you set up an OAuth-based authentication scheme, so let's say authenticate with GitHub, then to log into the editor, you've got to click on the screen, it takes you to GitHub, you click buttons, you approve, it takes you back, and you get logged in. That's great as a user with a browser where you can do all that clicking. If you want to do some sort of automated administration of a runtime, completely scripted, then you can't script the authentication step. You can't script the OAuth flows. So the idea with the tokens feature was basically a way to fall back that if we don't recognize a token the user provides when they log in. Oh, I should say the token is the underlying thing. You log in with the username and password or the OAuth. Part of that login, Node-RED then generates a token, which is what the editor then uses for every request for the runtime to recognize the user. And that token can be expired and so on and so forth. So we added the ability to have this tokens function in admin auth. So if the token we are provided isn't one we recognize as our own, we pass it to this function and allow this function to tell us, is this a good token or not? So that allows tokens to be generated outside of Node-RED. So it allows scripted access. Unfortunately, so that's goodness. And that's the main use case. And that was the primary use case this was conceived for. Now, in hindsight, it's very obvious that you could also use this to allow, and it's how I described it in the release notes, You could also use this for integrating the Node-RED editor into an existing authentication system where the user gets redirected to Node-RED and they're already logged in using some system-generated token. So let's step through and see what happens when you do that. What have we got? So here I've got Node-RED running, but I've not got any authentication set up. So we are just going to edit my settings file. Let's see, have I got... no, I'm not even set up here. So if we set admin auth, type, we'll stick credentials in for now, not so important. In fact, I'm just going to copy the tokens function from the bug report. As good as any. Okay. So now when we run Node-RED, hi Navin, I have seen your question about MQTV5. No news on that at the moment. I mean, it's in the backlog. We need to. Oops. Oh yeah. It's in the backlog. It's something we need to look at. Just not had bandwidth to do it properly. Yeah. Anyway, there's a bunch of stack trace on the screen. There's some timing issue with WebSockets when you enable authentication, but we're not going to worry about that. So now when I reload, it's prompting me for username and password. Well, if you recall, I didn't actually set any usernames and passwords, so there's literally nothing I can put in here that will get me connected. In fact, what I'm going to do is, if I show you the command line version first, there's going to be a test of spelling. So if we just do a request of localhost 1880/settings, you can see it's come back with a 401 unauthorized, which is good. So now if we do it again, but sent the authorization, and it's American spelling, bearer, no, I copied and pasted it a bit too quickly. So he uses example@example.com. Bearer example.com. So by passing in that bearer token, that has caused it to pass example@example.com to my custom tokens function. And in the bug report, example@example.com, if the token matches that, then it returns the admin user with full permissions. Otherwise, they don't get in. So that's goodness for the command line. That means I've got scripted access to the whole of the admin API, as long as I provide that token. So now let's switch back to the, well, that's great, but how do I access the editor with that? Now what you can do with Node-RED is, if you have an access token, you can provide it as a query parameter. So access token equals example@example.com. So now when I access that page, it didn't do anything. Oh, okay. Interesting. Why has that? That did the right thing for me earlier. What have I done wrong? Query parameter access token. Okay, that's curious. Have I got the token right? Example@example.com. See, I tested this earlier and it it did more than that. Right, what we're going to do is Oh, thinking on my feet whilst I try and live stream. Right, we're going to run Node-RED slightly differently. I'm going to run it like that. Oh, query string should be for the hashtag. Yep. Thank you. Of course I killed it, so let's just restart. Okay, so now when I reload, so I've accessed the editor. You see it's loaded in the background, but it's prompted me for my username and password again. So whilst I have provided a valid token and I've got some way in, it has now prompted me for this. Now, what has happened? Between the editor and the runtime is a WebSocket connection, which is how the status messages and debug, all those messages flow between the runtime and the editor. So what has been missed in this feature is all of the authentication for the HTTP requests and validating the access token work. And as you can see in the background, it has loaded the editor. However, the WebSocket uses a slightly different scheme for verifying the token. So the WebSocket connects, the editor then sends a special packet over the WebSocket to provide the auth token, and the runtime validates it and either kicks off the WebSocket or replies saying invalid. And that's what you get when the WebSocket gets killed because of an invalid token. You get the login prompt. Yeah. So the essential problem is the code that authenticates the WebSocket just doesn't know about this custom token stuff. And we need to fix that. So let's dig in. In the source tree, packages, node modules at Node-RED, we want editor API. So this is the module that provides all the Express app endpoints for the editor and the admin API, as well as the WebSocket listener for the comms connection, and all the authentication code. So which way should we go at it? Let's look at comms. So this file is the one that sets up a listener for the WebSocket connections, called a comms connection. It and WS in here is the actual WebSocket connection, and it sets up a listener on the message event. And whenever it receives a message, it does whatever work. But it has this flag called pending auth. So if a WebSocket connects and we know that admin auth is set up, then pending auth is set to true, saying we are still waiting to authenticate this guy. If we receive a message, so if we are in pending auth state and we receive a message and we get a message.auth, a message with an auth property, that is a token. And what this code currently does is this block. Shall I make it bigger? This block, which goes off to the token store, which we'll go and look at in a sec, does a get of that token, which returns a promise, which eventually will get back a client. If the client exists, then we know it's good. It's a good token. And we go get the user object, and we know who's connected. Otherwise, if client is null, then it's a comms auth fail, and we shut down the connection with, I think that false means go away. Send out. Anyway, don't need to worry about that bit of it. But here we have the tokens.get call. So let's follow that through. Tokens is up in this auth folder, a tokens file. So this is the file that deals with the management of the tokens that Node-RED generates. And deals with generating them, retrieving them, revoking them, expiring them, all of that. But none of this is to do with the custom tokens that a user may have set up. Just stepping through it in my mind because I've not entirely joined up all the dots in my head yet as to how we're addressing this. Alongside the token store is the user's store, and this is actually where more of the custom user authentication stuff lives or hangs off here. So in here somewhere, so with this module, the users module exposes a tokens function, and this is what plumbs through to the user provided token, and by default it will return the default user, which by default is null. So if the user hasn't provided tokens, this is going to resolve to null anyway. But if the user has provided a custom tokens function, somewhere in here, somewhere in here, somewhere in there, we just plumb any call to tokens straight through to what the user has provided. And the key thing is we expect it to return a user object. Good. So if we come back to comms, so this is where I'm trying to keep it straight in my head and try and make sure I explain things clearly for you following. So in this auth folder, we have users and we have tokens. At the moment, comms comes straight to tokens to get a token. And if it's a valid token, it then exchanges that token. Where is it? I've lost the code now. Here we are. Yeah. If the token is valid, it then goes to the users to get the user object. But what? Okay. So we start by checking the internal token store. So the scenario we're handling, that's going to return null because there are no internal tokens. So we'll end up in this else block. And rather than give up straight away, what we're going to do is, no, not going to do an if, we're going to do a users.tokens message.auth. Now, as I write this, I can see this is a slightly, there's a bit of a smell on these APIs that tokens is exposed. You know, these two different types of token are exposed in two different ways, but I'm going to live with that for the moment. Because, so the key thing is user.tokens gets plumbed through to the user provided tokens function and will resolve with an actual client object. Is that right? Yes. Well, no, an actual user object. So in fact, by the time we're down here, it would be just the same as the code up here. We've just come about it a different way. So I'm just going to actually copy and paste that whole block. Right. So just to go through it one more time, just to make sure I've got it straight. We check the internal token store. If that doesn't find anything, we then check the user provided token store. If that finds something, awesome sauce, we carry on. Otherwise we have to, otherwise we bail. However, and this is where I thought we might trip up, and this is where I regret not doing a little bit more preparation for this issue so I wouldn't have to talk through it live. So the fly in the ointment is we actually use client.scope. And what is significant about client.scope? So that determines the user scope. So that determines what is that user actually allowed to do. Now, I think that is actually... Okay, yeah. So the way this works, when a user tries to authenticate using the normal scheme, they can actually request a scope of what access they would like. So an admin user might have full read-write permission, but when they authenticate, they might ask for a token that only gives them read permission. Which is good sense. You want to ask for the least permissions you need for a particular task, particularly if you're doing something automated. So that's why up here, if we manage to, if it's a good token that we know about, we get back the client reference for that token, which includes its own scope. So that is the scope that was granted for that token, which may be a smaller scope than the user's own permission. When we come down here, as in this is the new user provided token, what we're going to do is we're just going to use the permissions that the user has, because we don't know any different. I think that's right. Yeah, I think that's right. Right. Let's try that out. So rerun node-red. Okay, rerun node-red, and now when I refresh, it's got the access token in local storage, so it's just reused it, and we're in. And it looks like comms is authenticated. Everyone is happy. So let's just do a inject debug. Always worth just sanity checking. We can get messages over comms. We've authenticated. If I hit log out, that's worked. It's forgotten about the access token. So the only way to get back in is to bounce back in with the auth token, and that lets us in. So that's fixed, which is good. The astute amongst you will then prompt me for, okay, Nick, so what about the unit tests? To which I'll say, yeah, unit tests. Why? What have we got? What have we got in terms of coverage? I know our coverage is a little light in this area. Oh, hey, Spencer. Just see you in the chat there. So if you've not seen this before, the way we structure our unit tests in the source tree, we have a test folder, unit tests, and then the test structure mirrors 100% the source code structure. And so for every single source file, there's a corresponding unit test file with _spec in its name, which makes it very easy to go and find the tests for a particular file, because they're not buried away. They are, if you know the path to one, you can go and find the path to the other. So what are we doing? No, we don't need to unit test the tokens. So we've not added anything to the token stuff. We've added stuff to the comms endpoint. And there must be unit tests in here to do with authentication. Authentication required, no anonymous users. Yeah, I remember these tests are quite involved, because WebSockets are just because you're dealing with real connections, they're just a pain. And I suspect this probably stubs out quite a lot of yeah, it stubs out actual calls to users default users get. You can see, so we set up these stubs for the code to call as part of the unit tests. It looks like the tests are set up so that if I try and authenticate as a user called Fred, I'm allowed in. If I'm not Fred, I'm not allowed in. And it looks like it's set up so that if I authenticate with the token 1234, I log in as Fred. 5678, I come in as Barney, and anything else will be nothing else. So what we're going to do is add a get user token stub. If this works first time, considering I haven't written these tests for a very long time. So this is stubbing out the call to the user provided token function. We'll say if username is Wilma to keep the Fred and Barney. No, it's not, sorry, username. At this point, it's token. Yeah, we're not going to have Wilma in this one. So you can see we already handled tokens 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I bet, yeah, here I use 2, 3, 4, 5 as one that's non-existent. So we need a magic token to use. We'll use A, B, C, D, E. So this is going to be, for a test we'll write in a minute, we'll expect this token to get passed through. If it does that, then we'll resolve with our, why don't we resolve with, which I mentioned, let's have Wilma come back. Else when dot resolve null. Okay. So we're going to set up a stub on that function, which means, for those not familiar, rather than call the real function, it will call this test stub instead. So this is handy when you're unit testing a file. You don't have to run the whole system. You can just test the thing itself. Thank you. I'm missing return. You'll note I use when.resolve. So all of this dates back to when before promises were native in Node, and we used the when library. So there's a lot of remnant code in Node-RED still using when. We slowly try and eradicate it as we find it. Just not doing that here and now. Yes, we set up all these stubs, and then after all of our tests, you need to remember to restore it so that the next tests, well, you don't screw things up by leaving your stubs in place. I've not actually written any new tests yet, but let's just get set up to run it. It was test unit at Node-RED. No. Where am I? Why isn't that auto-completing? Okay, that's disappointing. Did I miss something? Test? No. Okay. Maybe it doesn't like auto-completing after the at, which just means more typing for me. At Node-RED, editor API, lib, editor, comms _ spec. So we run that, it runs through the tests, they all pass. Well, we'd expect that because we've not added any new code. If I was doing test-driven development, I would have started here and written the failing tests first, but I always remember to do test-driven development after I've fixed the issue and promise myself next time. So we're just going to copy this test, which is allows connections that do authenticate. Copy and paste that and do user provided token to distinguish it. And when the WebSocket opens, we send the auth packet. And what was our special auth packet we just set up? We said ABCDE is going to be the user provided token. And we expect that to all work. Interestingly, this doesn't actually verify who we authenticate as. But the main point is we should be authenticated, and it should allow us to subscribe, as in it allows us, it shows that we have the read permission, which is what Wilma, where is she? There we go. Wilma, well, she's got star. And this isn't, it's the other error. We return something subtly different, and we have to return a permissions object, not a scope object. Yeah, okay. So let's run that. Well, that worked. Allows connections that do authenticate user provided token. So just if I'd taken out that check, oh no, if I well, yeah, no, that is it working. There's not really much else to say. No, let's just prove that. So if I comment out any handling of ABCD is a valid token, I rerun the test, and now I expect it to fail, which it has, because it got a fail instead of an OK on our user provided token authentication, because no one owned up to knowing about ABCDE as a token. So that works. That test passed. And then we don't need to add anything about rejecting, because all of this code around non-existent or invalid tokens, because they fail in the local token store, they will fall through to the user token store. So that code path will be being tested by those tests. That makes sense to me. Anyway, so just rerun that test just to check. Good. Okay, so to summarize, we now fall back to check the user provided tokens as well as the built-in tokens. And we log the audit event properly. Yep. And we still fail properly. Yep. And then get user token. Oh yeah, the unit test was all good. Okay, so we're going to commit this, authenticate WebSocket comms using user provided token if present. And this fixes issue number 2642. Very good. Should be able to just push that in now. Yeah, it's pushed, and well, quick refresh, and that issue's now closed. Hurrah. One down. Yeah, so there's a bunch of other issues. I mean, I've somehow managed to spin that one out for 45 minutes. The one I might just quickly do, because it's pretty quick and easy to add, is this debug flag around Requestanimationframe. So let's just spin up Node-RED again. So yeah, so the symptom is, just come on. The symptom is the screen just goes blank when you switch back to the tab after a period of it being idle. And it's just really weird because there is no, the editor is completely dormant if it's not active. I mean, it's dormant right now. It's not. There's no thread running. There's no worker doing anything. It's waiting for you to do stuff, or it's waiting for comms messages to come over debug. So switching away from it, there is no work going on to get stalled by anything. He says out loud, no. So I was just wondering for a moment there that what if messages were flowing over debug to be drawn in the sidebar panel? Could that be triggering requests to redraw the screen? I don't know. Right. No. On view.js. Yeah, so in 1.1, this is what... Yeah, so redraw is like 900 lines of all the meaty code for actually drawing flows and creating all the elements in the workspace. And I spent a bunch of time, and if you remember the slightly funny beta 2 we did, where all the nodes, every time you switch tab in the workspace, would slowly migrate. That's because I spent a lot of time completely rewriting a lot of this code to make it as efficient as possible. So use far less D3 and use a lot more native DOM, browser functions directly, rather than going through D3 as a layer of indirection. It shaved a few milliseconds off here and there, which all adds up. But yeah, one of the other things I did was wrap. So the external API, if you like, is things called redraw. And what that does is it triggers a request to the browser to, at some point later, as in within the next tens of milliseconds, call back on the redraw thread, or on the painting thread, and do the actual work to do the redraw. Now, so I've got, a couple things here which I'm going to try out. Trouble is, because I can't reproduce the issue, it's a little tricky. So request animation frame, what's nice about it is it's very well supported. It's been around. It's one of those things I remember discovering, and it just felt, I don't know, it just doesn't feel, it feels a hacky, I don't know, there's just something about it. It just hangs there, this function, request animation frame, just sitting there. Anyway, what is interesting is I don't know how it coalesces multiple calls to request animation frame. So if you're doing an animation, it makes sense. You want 60 frames per second. You want to be called regularly. But if you tab away, then the browsers, I can't remember what they do, but they do change their handling of request animation frame. And what they do, they provide a high resolution timestamp, so you can work out how long has it been since you were last called. So if you're doing proper animation, you can work out how much something should move in order to achieve the smooth frame rate you want. Now, that's not relevant to us. What is perhaps more relevant is if for some reason multiple calls have been made to request animation frame, then does the browser spend more time calling redraw more times than it needs to? Because if we call it twice and it's not yet done the redraw, that doesn't mean we need to redraw twice. It just needs to redraw once. So, like with set timeout, request animation frame does return an identifier that you can cancel the outstanding request with. So, first things first, we're going to say pending redraw. So if someone calls redraw, we'll say if pending redraw, so it's not null, we are going to use cancel animation frame to deschedule it. And then we'll set pending redraw to the ID of the new request. Is that good? I think that's good. Do we need to null out? Do we need to null it out? In fact, what's the browser support like? Full support, Edge, Internet Explorer, good. Yeah, full support. Okay, so I don't need to worry about browser support. So in theory, just that little bit is going to reduce, if it's the case that we're getting pounded with lots of requests to draw, and rather than save work, I've actually ended up driving more work. That will require, this will mean we'll only do one redraw. Yeah, it doesn't matter how many times people ask before we get round to it. We'll get round to it and now satisfy all those requests. We don't have to do it n times. Okay. Now let's just check. Yeah, that's all good. That is all good. Now the other bit I wanted to do was add in, because we don't know if this solves it, I do want a way for the people who can recreate this window going blank issue, a way to turn off request animation frame. And like I said at the start, I'm not ready for us to turn it off for everyone. We can always do a 0.2 maintenance release if we decide we need to. But what I'm going to add is if red.view, which is the file we're in, now this is going to be a temporary flag. It's not going to be long-lived, so I'm not going to get too hung up on what it's called, but equally I want to call it something sensible. Debug sync redraw, because we want it to be synchronous, not asynchronous. So if debug sync redraw is set, so you'll be able to set it anytime from the console in the browser, then from then on it will do synchronous redraw. It won't touch request animation frame. Yeah, makes sense. That has rebuilt, so let's just, if we reload. So it looks like you need to null pending redraw after cancelling it. Yeah, that I did pause. That was one of the things I was running through my mind after cancelling it. I don't think we do, because if it's like set timeout, then it doesn't hurt to set timeout something that isn't active. And we're going to set it instantly here, so there's no value to nulling it out here. Where it might be is actually nulling it out here. because okay, so the logic is slightly flipped around. There are two different ways to do this sort of buffering of requests. One approach is you set the timeout to begin with, and then subsequent requests just get no opt because there's a timeout already set up, and at some point it's going to fire, and then it needs to clear any state so any subsequent requests know to set up the timeout. What we're doing here is slightly different. What we're doing here is, if there's a pending redraw request, we'll cancel it and we'll set up a new one. Which means that we don't need to clear out this state because it's not going to block anything, because we will always be calling Requestanimationframe. I'm going to go with it this way round, and let's just see where we end up. So look, things are still redrawing. This is all Requestanimationframe. That's goodness. Actually, there is a somewhere, and I only discovered it when I was playing around with this stuff, and I can't now remember where it is. Is it rendering? No. I want JavaScript animations. It's one of these. Request blocking, rendering, performance monitor. Is that? Yeah, performance monitor. Here we are. Now I want to spend a lot more time in here because this is. I've only recently discovered this, perhaps to my shame, but it lets you keep track of lots of really interesting things, like how many times we're doing style recalculations or layouts or document frames. Is it document frames? Yeah, I don't know if any of these correlate to, is it layouts per second? There we go. So that's causing some spike in activity. But I've no idea if this is going to tell us anything useful. But if we now set red.view. What do we call it? Debug sync redraw. That's now true. It now means this redrawing is happening synchronously. Yeah, and I think you'd be hard pushed to tell the difference. I don't know if it was that beneficial moving things over to Requestanimationframe. I think before I push this, before I ship in the maintenance release, I'm going to spend a bit more time than I will on this live stream flipping around with Requestanimationframe, because it feels like it's going to improve performance because it's moving things off the event loop, but I don't know if I'm kidding myself about that. I think I need to do a bit more playing, and I don't know. For now, I'm just going to see through what I've done. So this is going to avoid overloading Requestanimationframe by stacking lots of the requests up and then forcing lots of redraws to happen. Maybe that's the issue. If that's not the issue, then those users will be able to set this special flag and see if they can still reproduce it. That will at least tell us if Requestanimationframe's at fault, and give them a way, if it's that inconvenient, just to nudge the window size when they switch back or to refresh, then at least for the next couple of weeks before we do a next maintenance release. Yeah, we're going to go with that. We are going to ship it. So add red.view. Red.view.debug sync redraw to disable request animation frame. And we're going to say references. What was the issue number? Blank window 2631. Cool. Right, well that's probably what I'm going to do code-wise for tonight. It's been a long day. Let's say there's a handful of issues I want to tidy up for 1.1.1, the next maintenance release. Yeah, I think the most pressing. I mean, it'd be good to get the hard-coded styles sorted so the themes can be tidied up. I don't think the others are ones I consider regressions. Some of those are long-standing bugs, and if they've been around that long, they can be around a little longer. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so good question. You mentioned timing for releases. So that's I was going to spend just 5 minutes talking about that, if anyone wanted to talk around that. Yeah, so we published this last week, a rough plan for how we're going to tackle releases moving forward. And this came about, a few conversations with different people. Some of the companies who embed Node-RED interested in having a bit more of a predictable schedule for what we're doing in the project, just so they can plan around that, or at least they know what we're doing. We don't surprise them. So perfectly valid and good thing to ask. So yeah, we put together this release plan. Let me somewhere, if I go here, a slightly bigger version. And the basic idea is we're going to attempt, target doing what we've called milestone releases, essentially new feature releases every 3 months. So we've just done one June 30th last week. So the next one will be approximately September 30th. We're not going to hold anyone's feet to the fire to make that happen, but it will be that sort of timescale when we consider planning for features. And we're also well aware 3 months after that would be December 31st. And, we would be foolish to voluntarily schedule a new feature release over the Christmas and New Year break. I mean, that's just silly. There's no need to do that. So that's why we say it's approximately 3 months. Well, we're going to do 3 months, and then it'll be about 4 months, end of January for 130. And then come end of April, that is when Node 10 reaches its end of life. We still support in Node-RED Node 8, which reached its end of life at the beginning of this year. And we still, quote-unquote, support it because we don't want to drop... dropping a version of Node is a major change. And we recognise there will be some people who are stuck on older versions of Node for good reason. It is unfortunate some of the older bits of hardware are losing favour, like the Pi 0, I think, or is it the Pi W? Anyway, one of them, just its architecture isn't getting the same. They don't get official builds of Node anymore, so there are challenges. But we can't forever keep supporting and holding ourselves back, because there's some cool new features in Node 12, Node 14, that we would like to be able to take advantage of eventually. So we'll come end of April, we will publish Node-RED 2.0. And at this point, all we're saying is, it will be business as usual, but that will drop support for Node 8 and Node 10. And that's it as far as quote-unquote breaking changes go. But it does obviously give us a bit of leeway if there is a bigger change we want to make, or something a bit bigger that kind of needs the major version bump to warrant doing. All the while trying to maintain backwards compatibility as far as flows, as far as all the basics go. And that, you can see from the diagram, then that cycle carries on. Notionally, we do the 2.x branch as the active stream for a year, and then the whole thing repeats when node 12 reaches its end of life, end of April, and we bump up to node 3, node red version 3. Meanwhile, we will maintain the 1.x release in maintenance mode, which means it will only receive fixes, security fixes, and what have you, if there are new features added to 2.0 that can be practically, that aren't so tied to stuff in 2.0 that they can be backported. That could be considered if there is demand and the resource to do it. That's the big question mark on this whole plan, is we're an open source project. We can't take for granted anyone's participation. So doing a timescale that has dates going out 2 years in the future is, it's our in good faith, optimistic view of the world, assuming things pan out. But who knows? Open source project. Who knows? We cannot guarantee anything. But all goodwill in the world, this is what we would like to do. So the question was around maintenance releases, and I've been talking about a 1.1 release. It's sick of saying that, but so we've said maintenance releases will continue to happen as and when they're needed. So it will always depend on the nature of the issues being fixed. Are they how loudly are people shouting for fixes? Do we need to rush something out because a lot of people are hitting a problem? Or is it a complete show-stopping issue for someone that we want to unblock them as quickly as we can? It really depends. But because maintenance releases, because we use different branches in Git for new code development versus the sort of stable code, then the stable branch is pretty much shippable all the time. So it should be, if we are happy with a fix and it is tested and we know it's good in and of itself, then it's 10 minutes work to crank out a new release, the maintenance release. So we're not committing to any sort of schedule for maintenance releases other than saying that they will continue to happen as and when they need to happen. Just being mindful we don't want to overload ourselves with maintenance releases, milestone releases, stable releases, whatever it might be. So that's the plan. For 1.1, as I've shown, there's a smattering of issues. None are critical, but that's why we've not rushed anything out. But we're a week into 1.1.0. People are going to have upgraded by now. It would be nice to get some of these things fixed, and these little paper cuts fixed and published, so that everyone can go through their upgrade cycle again. But I think it's been the big benefit of doing the beta releases, of really flushing out the stuff that we just don't have the capacity in the core team to test and cover every single scenario. So the beta releases have greatly improved the quality of what we end up shipping. But then inevitably we don't get enough coverage of everything. So there we are. Yes. So expect 1.1 later this week. I'll try and knock through a few more of these issues tomorrow. I'm also working on a whole bunch of documentation updates. yeah, a whole load went in and new videos went up as part of the 1.1 release. But I'm sort of more in a documentation frame of mind than I am a code frame of mind, and trying to strike while the iron's hot on that one and get more of the long tail of to-do items on the documentation sorted out. So yeah, so if you've, I'll show you one of the things we added. Oh, not in the user guide. In the creating nodes section is a new section on the node edit dialog. So it explains a bit more about the node edit dialog, but also started to add in example controls using the standard styles that we provide in the editor, so you can see what they look like, as well as the special typed input widgets with examples, the different styles you get, and how to do the multi-line text editor. Stuff that's just long gone undocumented. There's a weird buglet, so these are functional, can actually do stuff with them. There is a weird bug that when you click anything that generates a drop down, oh, not that one, here, this one, the whole page jumps, and there you get the drop down menu. You select your option and it jumps you back. That doesn't happen in Node-RED, obviously. There's just something odd about the hack, and it is a huge hack to get these controls embedded in this page. But yeah, so looking at what other documentation we could add just to improve the overall experience. But there we are. As usual, I've overrun my hour. We've knocked a couple things off the to-do list, which is good. Hope that's interesting. Soon, maybe even next week, we'll turn our gaze to 1.2, the next milestone release, and some of the new features. We've got a lot of pull requests for 1.2 that are already there in draft, and going to hopefully this month, use the first month of the 3 to clear the backlog of pull requests that we're going to get into 1.2. So we have plenty of time to get a beta out and get more test feedback on some of these new features around subflows. That's it. So as ever, any questions, do say hi in the chat, or do come and talk to us in Slack or the forum. If you're watching on YouTube, I hope this is interesting. Again, I sort of, each week I decide fairly last minute what I'm going to cover. It largely depends what there is to actually need doing, but if there are particular topics you'd like a bit more info on, do let me know, and more than happy to try and contrive a reason to talk about other parts of the Node-RED codebase. Excellent. So with that, I think as traditional, I'm going to go have a cup of tea. Great. Thanks everyone for joining, and I'll see you next time. Bye.